Hello and welcome to episode 203 of Retro Encounter, RPG fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and I'm going to start this episode off with an apology. I've had a lot of computer hardware issues the past month or so, and as such, the recording for episode 203 that we had last week was awful and had to be thrown out. And I ended up missing a week of the podcast for the first time in several years. So I apologize for that inconvenience. We might re-record that episode's topic again in the future. I'm not sure yet. But for now, I'm here, and so is Zach Wilkerson.
Hey there.
Now, Zach, hopefully we don't have any hardware issues for this recording. I'm hoping extremely hard. But when I was scrambling for episode topics this week, one that sort of popped up was, hey, how about we just talk about Dragon Quest for 90 minutes?
Yeah.
Because that is something that I will do unprompted, easily.
Same.
Yeah, exactly. And your first episode of Retro Encounter was a Dragon Quest episode in early 2019.
That's true.
Right. Okay, so I'm not misremembering that.
Yep, Dragon Quest 11 spoiler cast. First time on the podcast. It was good.
Right, yeah. I wanted to get that spoiler cast off as soon as possible, and you had expressed interest in it. So I'm like, all right, okay, 2 Robs, Alana, Zach, let's go.
Yeah, it was a good one.
And I was just really desperate to talk about Dragon Quest XI with someone, so I set up that podcast very deliberately. But this is not about Dragon Quest XI, or I should say this episode is not just about Dragon Quest XI. In several times in the past, we've done favorites episodes on Retro Encounter, where we break down a series and sort of decide what our favorite or what our mathematically best game in the series is. We did that for Final Fantasy, Pokemon, and Tales of. With the first Final Fantasy one, I think being late 2016, maybe early 2017.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, all 3 of those were really fun to record, and were basically just series-wide discussions that came down to a vote or a rating at the end. And I think Dragon Quest is an ideal series to run this format through again, because there's several Dragon Quest games. We have opinions on all of them, and it maybe isn't the easiest to figure out a best one, because you and I eventually did come to a consensus, but there's contenders. Like this is Dragon Quest is pretty heavy at the top.
Yeah, there are 4 that I easily could say, probably 3 that I could say are my favorites. So yeah, it was a tough choice for me.
I also have 3, but there's I could easily expand the list to 4, 5, 6 if prompted. But we ended up arriving at a 1, and then we'll get to that at the very end of this podcast. But first, I want you and I, Zach, to talk about not every Dragon Quest game, but many of the Dragon Quest games, and just reminisce and ruminate on them a little bit. First, let's talk about the one Dragon Quest game that I know neither of us have played, because neither of us have speak fluent Japanese or have Japanese PSN or Nintendo or otherwise internet accounts. Dragon Quest X, which is the FF11, FF14 of the series, is straight up an MMO.
Yep.
And I don't know about you, but when it was coming out, I really eagerly followed the the character creation reveals that they did. Like they showed all the different races you could become in the game. You start out as human, but then you sort of reincarnate into a race of your choice, and that throws you into a character creator. It looks to be a pretty long, elaborate game, and it's been ported to everything the past couple years.
Yeah, I think the Wii U is the strongest following still, if I'm not mistaken, which I think is sort of amazing. It's like the thing that I think is keeping the Wii U going over there.
Yeah, I don't have any. I should probably search this before saying this, but I believe it's on the Wii, Wii U, Switch, 3DS, and PC.
That sounds right.
Yeah, it might have even had a PS4 port later, but I think it was mostly to Nintendo systems and PC, at least for a while. And the Switch port is pretty recent. I think there's even a Dragon Quest X Switch panel at Tokyo Game Show, so either they're probably updating it soon.
Yeah.
But I mean, as such, I've watched videos and I followed it when it was releasing pretty closely. But other than that, man, I know extremely little about Dragon Quest X, and I haven't even tried to play it. But because it has so many versions out, like it maybe still has a non-zero chance of coming to the West. Maybe, I'm not sure. I've basically given up hope, but it's like mathematically non-zero, I would say.
I think that pretty recently, they talked about maybe bringing it over in like a totally like offline format, so you could play it through, sort of like maybe trying to play like Dragon Quest IX now. But yeah, I mean, I think it still seems unlikely. But I mean, maybe if Dragon Quest XI for the Switch, which is coming out soon, sells well, maybe we'll get a shot at it. I don't think there's any chance of it ever being a fully fledged MMO over here. But I'd play it basically in any format they gave it to me. I don't even like MMOs. I don't play 14 like you.
I didn't like MMOs until I started playing 14 in 3 years ago.
I want to get into 14, but so many games, so little time. But I would play it in any format they gave it to me because Dragon Quest mainline, I'm here for it always.
Yeah, I would too. I'm not sure. Is there like an offline version existing already in one of its many ports?
I'm not sure. Maybe I don't. I really don't know.
Again, I haven't done the deep Dragon Quest X research in many, many years.
Yeah, I really don't know, to be honest with you. I just know that if I had the opportunity, I would play it.
As would I, but alas, that's not the case. And Dragon Quest X did not really make our cream of the crop top here. But we sort of had I sort of had this list organized into a couple groups, but we settled on a top 5. Mm-hmm. And so the last 5 games that we talk about in this discussion are sort of the ones that got several votes in our informal poll that we took. Throwing Dragon Quest X aside, the Dragon Quest series also has a ton of spin-off games, and was maybe one of the original RPGs with spin-offs, because it has things like the Mystery Dungeon series going all the way back to the early 90s.
Yeah, I mean, and then the Monster series, I think, sort of was one of the bigger one of the things that made it on the map, like put it on the map a little bit more in like the late 90s too. So yeah, I feel like spin-offs have been around forever with this.
Yeah, it's like I said, the first Dragon Quest spin-off that I believe was Torneko no Daiboken, which is basically Torneko's Big Adventure. Torneko is he was called Talon in the NES version of Dragon Quest IV. But or I should say Dragon Warrior 4. It's basically a semi-roguelike random dungeon action game.
It's such a strange combination.
Yeah, it really is. And they've had a couple starring Torneko, at least I think 3. Then another one starring Yangus from Dragon Quest VIII. And then they planned for a new one coming out soon that is starring, I believe, Eric and his sister from Dragon Quest XI.
Yeah, I believe so.
But that's not out. That was just teased earlier this year, or maybe late last year, and the Mystery Dungeon series has expanded way beyond that. It's developed by Chunsoft, which co-developed the first several Dragon Quest games, and they've had a Final Fantasy ones starring Chocobos, Pokemon ones starring various Pokemon, and a sort of spin-off into their own IP with the Shiren the Wanderer games. Like all of those are under the Mystery Dungeon umbrella, and they somehow started with a Dragon Quest spinoff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to play it, but man, it sounds so weird that I might.
Like I admire them. I have the same level opinion that I do about the Etrian Odyssey games, just because I appreciate Etrian Odyssey's uniqueness and sort of dedication to the idea of going through a dungeon, then teleporting out, then trying to get farther in the dungeon. Like that spirit of RPG dungeoneering is something I like a lot. And especially hearing some of our mutual friends and RPG fan talking up the Shiren the Wanderer game. The Shiren the Wanderer Vita game looks really good. But it's still one of these, mystery dungeon, semi-roguelikes, dungeon crawlers that I don't know if I have the stamina for, or at least the time to set aside for it.
Yeah, Persona Q is about as far as I can go on that, probably.
Yeah.
I respect what it does, but
the farthest I've gone on. It's definitely the farthest I've gone on that, since I have about a dozen hours into Persona Q2, and I played the hell out of Persona Q1. It's I had to get to those Yuzo Koshiro tracks in the credits. But you also mentioned Dragon Quest Monsters a few minutes ago. That came out in the late 90s. It started out as a Game Boy or maybe a Game Boy Color game. The first one was about Terry from Dragon Quest VI. And a later one was about Kiefer from Dragon Quest VII, but that was a GBA game that never came out west. And there were several for DS and 3DS called Dragon Quest Monsters Joker, and I don't know much about them except that the main character is a spiky haired waif that looks like a combination of 4 other Toriyama characters. But these games are basically monster training games that are similar to Pokemon, because you think of monster training, you think of Pokemon. They came out a couple years after Pokemon did in Japan, and they explore the really cool roster of monsters in the Dragon Quest games. But evolving them or finding new ones is much, much more challenging than just throwing a ball at one in the field. You have to feed your monsters specific things and then fuse them together to make more powerful ones.
Okay, that sounds cool.
And yeah, it gets pretty wild. Like there's versions of slimes and dragons that are not in any other Dragon Quest game in this Dragon Quest Monsters series. And things like the my favorite monster in Dragon Quest V, the Great Dragon, was not in any games in the main series other than 5 and 11. Mm-hmm. But it has been in the Monsters series for a full 2 decades.
So the real question is, how many times have you gotten the Great Dragon in Dragon Quest V? Because I never have.
Okay,
well, it's so hard.
I'm slightly embarrassed to say this. It is a 1 in 64 chance, which is on the more difficult side.
Yeah.
And I've played through Dragon Quest V, I believe 5 times, and I have gotten one every single time.
I got an Archdemon one time just by accident, so that was fun. But other than that,
that's fun. Those things look powerful in guides, but I've never gotten one myself.
Yes.
And I think the last time I played Dragon Quest V was for the podcast. We did 2 episodes on it in 2017, and I got really lucky. I got a Dragon Quest. I got a Great Dragon in about 15 or 20 minutes. So
that's impressive. I've tried. I've never had the patience for it. It's kind of like that sword in Earthbound. I can never
the Sword of Kings.
to do it. Yeah, same idea.
I got the Sword of Kings once by accident.
Everybody who is hearing that hates you.
The problem with that one is that that's in a long dungeon from an enemy. That's a slightly challenging encounter, and I think it's a similarly terrible number, 1 out of 64 or 1 out of 128.
Yeah.
That's brutal. So we don't need to talk about Earthbound or Dragon Quest V anymore, because Earthbound is not in the purview of this episode, and Dragon Quest V we'll get to later. A couple other Dragon Quest spin-offs of note, I think. There was the trio of slime games for GBA, DS, and 3DS. The second one came westward as Dragon Quest Rocket Slime, and that's a really fun little top-down action game.
I've never played it. What's it like?
It's top-down action, so it's like a 2D Zelda. Okay. You are a slime named Rocket who lives in a community of 101 slimes, and an army comes and kidnaps your whole village. So you have to run around and do rolling and some simple kind of and some simple actions and simple combat to try and rescue the other 100 slimes of your village. Okay. And occasionally you engage in giant tank battles with these with the platypus monsters and other monsters of the opposing side.
That sounds delightful.
Yeah, it is
super fun.
Yeah, it is super cute and fun. And if you can track down a copy for cheap, I totally recommend it. And the third one which is the 3DS game that never came westward, replaces the tank battles with pirate ship battles.
Oh man,
which is again 100% my jam, and I'm sad I never got to play it. But it's a very good one. If they came out with a new one on Switch, I would pre-order that thing in a hot second.
It's definitely better than one of the mainline games we'll talk about later. So yeah, sounds good.
Oh yeah. if I was doing a big ranking of Dragon Quest games, Slime would probably show up around the middle. Like it's a very, very cute, fun, good game.
Okay, sounds good.
But unfortunately, I can't speak to the GBA or 3DS versions. Let's see. More recently, there was 2 Muso Dragon Quest games, or Dragon Quest Warriors.
Yeah, I can't remember what they're called. I think it's Heroes. I can't remember which one they're called.
Dragon Quest Heroes. That's it. Right. I want to call them Warriors because I'm used to Dynasty Warriors and Samurai Warriors nomenclature. Yeah. And I own both of them, but I can't even say their titles right. but anyway, they are big, large-scale action games where you fight hordes of Dragon Quest monsters. You recruit several Dragon Quest side characters in addition to your player character and a couple new characters. If you want just sort of big attack 100 enemies at once action game, the Muso games are very fun, and these are very good versions of those. Yeah. But I never put a lot of time into these. I've played the multiplayer of Dynasty Warriors in the 3 to 6 range for dozens of hours because one of my friends is obsessed with Dynasty Warriors. multiplayer in those is all right, and I'm sure it's good in Dragon Quest Heroes as well. But it's just not a kind of game I enjoy.
I mean, it's just for me, it's just like literally hitting X over and over again to win. I played a little bit of the first one, just because I'm so into Dragon Quest, but it was, even with all the callbacks and the characters, it wasn't enough for me to keep me going. And I'm just like, okay, I don't have to do anything.
But you see, sometimes it's when
win.
you press, how many times you press X before you press triangle for a special move.
There you go. Yeah,
and
exactly.
when you press circle to use your meter.
Yeah, it was just, it was not for me.
Maybe my favorite Dragon Quest game that I've never even played or seen in person is Dragon Quest Monster Battle Road.
I've never heard of
this. Which is it's an arcade game that got a Wii release.
Okay.
In Japan only, and you would do something that you do in some Japanese arcades. You would buy a card, and then every time you play the game, you put your card in, and it retains your data from your last playthrough.
Okay.
The two main characters are the twins from Dragon Quest V. And you recruit other monsters and other characters for special cards, and it's basically card battling Dragon Quest villains. And occasionally, you do a big summon sequence that summons a classic Dragon Quest character. And those summon sequences are why I love this game, despite never seeing it in person. You can YouTube the special attacks in Monster Battle Road for days, and it's great.
Okay, that sounds like my jam.
So, of all that, those multitudes of games that we mentioned, I mean, I think we only talked about one of the Dragon Quest Monsters games, but there's been like 10 of them.
Right.
None of them are really cracking our top list, and weren't really being considered for the title of Best Dragon Quest Game. So let's get to the ones the proper list now. Zach, two games that are not in our final five are the first two Dragon Quest games,
That's
1
true.
and 2.
I mean, I'll be honest. I really like Dragon Quest 1. It's short. It's simple. I like the feel of it. Especially like I played it on mobile. I've played it on all the different versions. I really like the NES one. Just the way it feels, the music. It's kind of got like the creepy, like a creepy vibe to it. When Sugiyama actually could, I don't know, compose music that didn't suck. Go ahead.
8-bit spooky cave tracks are about peak Sugiyama as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. But yeah, I mean, I like the simplicity of it. I like the fact that you get a choice at the end. The Rainbow Bridge thing is really cool. And it embraces sort of what it is in a way that I think really works in a surprising way.
Yeah, and you can basically boil the whole game down to the world is an eternal night. The princess is captured. You need 3 items to make a rainbow bridge to fight the Dragon Lord. Mm-hmm. So you could easily beat this game in 5 or 6 hours, and if you're, a pro speedrunner type, probably much, much faster than that.
Yeah.
And so I think playing Dragon Quest 1 as like for educational purposes or to cross it off your list is not a huge ordeal.
Yeah, I mean, like, it sort of functions so much as a template for what every other game does, and so many games sort of play on and riff on those ideas, and it's still fun for me to go back to and sort of see the designs as they were originally, and it's amazing how much of Toriyama's work has sort of continued forward, especially in terms of his monster design and how amazing it was. And you go back and look at some of the art books for it, and it's just like, so much of the template of the series I love is there from the beginning, even more than I think Final Fantasy. Dragon Quest was Dragon Quest from the beginning.
Yeah, Final Fantasy reinvents itself with every new game, or maybe every couple games.
Right.
And but Dragon Quest has always been evolving, but it takes sort of small and medium-sized steps in its evolution, and it really never breaks away from those original ideas. And part of that you could use that as an insult or use that as a compliment. Like it's comforting how familiar it is while still evolving, or hey, it hasn't changed in 30 years. Like you could take either angle with it, but I mean, you and I both probably take the positive angle because we love this series.
Indeed, yes.
And again, Dragon Quest 1, I don't think it's bad, but it's definitely a 1986 first ever JRPG, and there's several caveats that come with that.
Yeah.
But the game that came afterwards, Dragon Quest 2, is not meaningfully different from Dragon Quest 1 in presentation or execution, except that you do have 3 playable characters, which is way more than the 1 from the first game. And but maybe the end game balance is a little off.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent a lot of time on this podcast recently ragging on Dragon Quest 2.
We both did.
And I like it overall. I mean, I really do. I mean, it's a game that frustrates me But it's actually, like I said, I think I've mentioned this earlier. It's the first JRPG I think that I beat by myself. I may be misremembering that, but may have gotten some help from my grandparents on this one. But I think I beat it by myself the first time. And there are things about it that I like. I mean, I think the story's a little bit more ambitious. I like that they've tried to introduce party balance. They do it really poorly, though, by making your main character do one thing and one thing only, which is hit. And he's also the only useful one.
He's the most boring main character in Dragon Quest history, which is no fault of his dope goggles, but very much the fault of his not having any spells.
Right. But the problem is that the spells from the other two characters are not that useful, and they're both like really weak, and they both go down really quickly. So he's still the most useful character despite his inability to do things. The world is way too large. There's not nearly enough markers once you get the ship. It's just go out and figure it out. And then Roan, which we've talked about ad nauseum here, is ridiculous. But there are things about it.
Roan and Roan are just brutal final set of dungeons.
There are things I like about it, but I appreciate the ambition. But again, as we've mentioned earlier, the ambition outstripped its design. They just didn't understand how to make it better, and the turnaround time was 9-10 months from Dragon Quest 1 to Dragon Quest 2, and I think
it came out less than a year.
Yeah, they were trying to pump it out too quickly, and they didn't play test it nearly enough.
You could say that Dragon Quest 1 and 2 are Irish twins.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
But I tried playing both of these on the NES, but I don't think I finished either of them there. I ended up getting the Dragon Quest 1 and 2 collection for Game Boy Color many years later.
Yeah.
And I beat both of them in the early 2000s, or maybe middle 2000s, just because I wanted to, cross them off the list and probably get the full Dragon Quest experience. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't neither of them hold up in 2019, but they aren't horrible, but I would never ever play Dragon Quest 2 again. I played it once, that was enough. It's last on my list of ones I want to replay.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and it's also almost 20 hours long too. I mean, it's significantly longer than the first one as well.
Yeah, it's I would say the 15-20 range. Yeah. I did not research how long to beat.com to check, but it's much more ambitious than Dragon Quest 1, but gets really frustrating, especially in the second half.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
But we're going to skip ahead several generations of consoles for a second and talk about another game that's not in our top 5, Dragon Quest 9. Mm-hmm. We did talk about this on an earlier episode. It might have been that same Worst in Show episode. But Dragon Quest 9 was a DS game and had a pretty large online component. There was an online store where you could use to buy different items, quests unlocked via both near-field technology and from downloading new stuff on the server every week. And I would log into that shop every day to try and get the rare materials and special items that came in every week. That was a big part of the game. Mm-hmm. But it was also a totally self-created game. You design your entire party just like Dragon Quest 3. And there's a pretty deep class system. And the story's good, but since the DS servers are all dead now, I think a part of Dragon Quest 9 sort of died with them.
Yeah, I mean, this is of the mainline games that have been brought over west. It's the only one that I haven't played to completion, and the problem was that I tried to play it after the DS servers shut down.
Oh no!
And so I liked it. Okay, I mean, I thought it was fine. But I was thinking about how much I missed. But I think that I've talked to people who played Dragon Quest 9 with other people, and just how amazing that multiplayer experience was. And I think that for some people, it's their favorite Dragon Quest game. I talked about my grandparents earlier. They sat and played Dragon Quest 9 together, and they loved it. But for me, it just didn't, because I didn't have that. It didn't work as well for me.
I mostly played it solo, but the handful of times I did play with friends, it was maybe not revolutionary, but definitely eye-opening and added a new dimension to the gameplay that made it a lot more fun. But I mostly played it solo, and again, those downloaded quests in that online shop are a pretty crucial part of the game to me. But it's not bad. I kind of like how you had to find the fruits that had fallen off the world tree in heaven, and but the problem was each fruit had granted someone's wish, and Monkey's Paw style, the wish twisted into something out of control.
Okay, yeah,
which is a very, very cute fairy tale concept. Mm-hmm. And it brought us to the fantastic Magic School segment, the Swine Dimples Academy part of the game, which was among the most amusing sections of the main quest. It was a non-linear main quest that ended up going some pretty cool emotional places at the end.
Okay.
With And Corvus is I would say better than average Dragon Quest villain.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think this game loses something without the online component, and which is why I'm probably not going to replay it. But if they ever did a remake of this that had it, either online more permanent or just have it be more fully featured, even if you're offline, I would probably play that remake because this game was a little technology limited, and Nintendo had not figured out online in 2009 or whenever this game came out.
Yeah.
And it's a good, fun game that I wouldn't mind revisiting, but not in its current state. This is, especially since every Dragon Quest game from 1 through 8 has been remade multiple times. I think this is the game in the series most ripe for a remake.
Yeah, I think you bring it to the Switch and add a little bit of online functionality and just kind of clean up the graphics a little bit. I think people would go wild for it. I mean, Dragon Quest.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, it's bigger,
and it's been so long. It's been long enough that I would not feel bad about a replay. Dragon Quest VI is not in our top 5.
It's one that would have been close for me, though. I like it more than you do, I think.
Yeah, I don't look at it as highly as a lot of other games in the series. I think it's a good Super Nintendo RPG. It's longer. It's the longest game in the series, other than 7 and 11. I think it sort of expands upon the Dragon Quest III class system in a pretty big way, and it introduces they brought this back in Dragon Quest VII, where you have characters fight battles within one class, and then you unlock more classes by mastering classes.
Yeah.
So it's much slower than a Final Fantasy job system, but it builds to a pretty impressive end game once you have a bunch of classes under each character's belt. But I don't love 6 because I think the characters feel a little bland. Like Hassan and Milieu right at the beginning are pretty likable, and Terry near the end is good, but like, I don't remember feeling anything about Barbara's personality, and I can't even remember the name of the monk kid that joins you.
Oh man, I don't remember either. Now that you're saying that, yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, it's like I think Dragon Quest VI is good, but doesn't have the personality of my favorite Dragon Quest games. But the one thing that's great about Dragon Quest VI is the dream world concept.
Yeah, I agree.
That is so cool. That like you live in a sort of a real world, and then sort of floating above in the clouds is a dream world, which is composed of everyone's dreams. So a boy that is sick in his bed all day in the real world has a magical flying bed in the dream world, and of the ruins of a castle with one descendant of like the castles of a knight lamenting the fallen kingdom in the real world, the castle is thriving and real in the dream world.
Mm-hmm.
So several situations like that play about, and you traverse the world by traveling between the real world and dream world, where there might be a connection or a bridge in one but not the other, and that story concept is really cool. And once the sort of larger plot and villains take shape, basically after you defeat Murdaugh early on, the game gets a lot more dramatic. But I think that the characters are sort of below average, and the class system, while fun, is a little slow moving and not as good as basically the same version in 7. So yeah, I don't rate Dragon Quest VI that highly relative to the rest of the games in the series, but it's not bad. If you're a Dragon Quest fan, it's like, don't avoid this game, but it's just not one of my particular favorites.
I mean, I think there are 2 things it does better than any other Dragon Quest game. I love the post game boss because it's such like a weird.
Nocturnus.
Nocturnus is I think it's the hardest post game boss outside of maybe Dragon Quest VIII's very sort of intense run that is added to the 3DS version. But it's such a cool thing that like it comes up for
he's very hard. Probably the final Dragon Quest VIII 3DS ones are harder. And I think that the high level grotto bosses in Dragon Quest IX are harder.
Okay. Yeah.
But Nocturnus is a real mofo of a post game boss, and maybe one of the first post game bosses I've ever even heard of.
Yeah. And it's just so cool. Like that it's like this 15-minute thing that you see in one of the side stories, and then he comes back. I think is really fun. And I also love that you get to travel around on a bed. I know we didn't talk about it for best transportation. We should have. The idea that you're flying around on a bed is really cool to me. But otherwise, I think that it sort of functions as a template for Dragon Quest VII, which I like better, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I like the small side stories that you get. I think that it does that better than any game except 7 in terms of like sort of the emotional stories that you get within them. And I like the job system too. I mean, it's really easy. Once you get to the end, you're going to have to break it in like really specific ways in order to take down Nocturnus. But I thought the character designs were pretty cool, and I love the dream system or the dream world system, which kind of gets pulled a little bit for Chrono Cross in some ways. But overall, I
A
thought
little bit, sure.
the art style in the Super Nintendo I thought was amazing. Outside of Chrono Trigger, it's my favorite art style in the Super Nintendo. So I like it a lot, but it certainly falls short of maybe 4 or 5 others for me.
You want to talk about favorite art style on the Super Nintendo? My favorite is probably Seiken Densetsu 3, which we talked about on this podcast.
Indeed, we did, yes.
A few months ago. You mentioned these sort of side stories and like the segmented nature of the story. I think that's true of a lot of Dragon Quest. Like you'll sort of find a new continent or a new region. You'll resolve the problem of that region and then move on. Like sometimes Dragon Quest gets a little bit dungeon town.
Yeah.
And those individual anecdotes, are like they vary in quality, of course. But I think that's how Dragon Quest has always been designed, and is the anecdotes in 6 are good. I think they're better in 7 and 11 and several other games in the series. But like 6 is again a good version of that, and it's not a bad game. I don't want to sound like I dislike it. I just don't. It's not in my top 5. Yeah. Clearly outside the top 5, personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think in 6 that they feel more like 6 and 7. I think feel the most self-contained. I mean, I think those are designed by the same people, right? 6 and 7 were, if I'm not mistaken.
Possibly. I mean, they have a near identical class system, right, but with different different names and different paths.
I believe they were, and to me, they feel more self-contained in those 2 games than they do in others. But yeah, I mean, to some degree, I know that's something that happens in all of them, but I feel like the stories are a little bit more poignant in 6 and 7 than they are in other places, and they feel more disconnected from sort of the overall narrative in some cases, which is sort of, your mileage could vary on how much you like that, but for me, that kind of worked.
Maybe, but we'll talk about those disconnected stories in 7 very soon.
Yeah.
But we only have 6 Dragon Quest games left to talk about, so we're going to discuss the last one that is outside our special top 5. And that's Dragon Quest IV. I like DQ4 a lot. I probably like it more than some of the games in our top 5, which again were a compiled vote. But you basically have characters that all easily inhabit one of the classes from Dragon Quest III, and you're introduced to these characters, some one by one, some in pairs, with these 4 starting chapters. So you get the backstory to all of the side cast to start, and then in chapter 5, which is about half of the game, you recruit these. The main character of chapter 5 is the hero, which can be a male or female, just like in Dragon Quest III. And you recruit the characters in the reverse order that you met them in their chapters. Mm-hmm. So it's basically a normal Dragon Quest game that gives more context and more backstory to its side characters. And I think the character designs and team designs are just delightful in Dragon Quest IV. Like the Tornico, who got his own series of spin-offs, is a jolly, chubby merchant. And you have Ragnar McRyan, the knight, Princess Elena, the fighter, who's one of the all-time Dragon Quest kick-ass ladies.
Oh yeah.
And I think the total cast is around 8. And then you also get a baby dragon that joins you for part of the end game. Mm-hmm. He's sort of the forgettable final side character. And in the DS version of Dragon Quest IV, you can get a new endgame scenario where Sorrow, the main villain of DQ4, comes to his senses and joins your party to fight a true villain. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Sorrow is a great villain. The cast is great. It's still a very simple sort of NES RPG. And there's honestly, I think, more complexity and exploration in Dragon Quest III. But it's a really satisfying arc, and it was the first Dragon Quest game I beat. Of all the ones I rented on the NES in the 90s, it was the one I got the furthest in. It was the one that sort of first sparked my interest in the series in a real way.
I mean, to me, it feels like sort of a template for Super Nintendo RPGs. Like the fact that it's an NES RPG, when I go back and look at it, just like the quality of the storytelling and how ambitious it is, it's very difficult for me to sort of like cognate that it's an NES one. But the thing that holds it back for me, in the NES version at least, is the AI from your party.
God, they're awful.
So
especially Kristoff.
Yeah. Kirill makes a lot of really terrible mistakes. They're casting death spells on people that it's obviously not going to work on. But it feels so much bigger in storytelling than any NES RPG by like a mile. So yeah, I mean, I really like that element of it. I think that the characters are really cool. Like the feeling of recruiting them when you know them already. Like I remember that feeling of getting like Ragnar the first time. It was super exciting for me. So I like it a lot. I think the DS version improves on it pretty dramatically.
Yeah, especially as you can control your party members,
Yeah.
like you mentioned,
Yeah.
or at least set AI behaviors for them. So like you won't have Kirill casting whack or thwack.
Right.
They were called beat and defeat
Oh,
in
yeah,
the
yeah.
NES version,
Yeah,
and he was
okay.
called Christo instead of Kirill.
Oh, yeah,
So
okay.
like I remember going through endgame parts of the game, just like, damn it, Christo! He was just trying to cast defeat and it would against a boss and it would miss, and then I'd have to reload and go through the dungeon again and bring along Nara instead of Christo,
Yep.
just because she was a non-idiot with her, even though she didn't have as many powerful healing spells.
He's like the second best character in the DS version, but in the NES one, I think I never had him on my party. It was so long ago, it's hard for me to remember.
Yeah.
But yeah.
He has the most powerful healing magic. He can equip pretty good armor and weapons.
Yeah.
And is should, if anything, be unbalanced and way too powerful, except that he's held back by Moron AI. I wonder if that was a deliberate choice.
Yeah, maybe. That's really poor game design if that's the case, but yes, maybe so. But I mean, I liked him as a character, and I like the DS version a lot, but to me, the storytelling is still a little more simplistic than some of the other ones. That's why I like some other ones better, but I do have a lot of positive nostalgia for Dragon Quest IV.
Yeah, Dragon Quest IV is good. It's not in our top 5, but we have arrived. These are the top 5 that we considered for our number 1 spot. So we're not going to go in ranking order. We're going to go in chronological order through 3, 5, 7, 8, and 11. And then after we talk about Dragon Quest 11, we'll reveal the one that we privately voted on and chose as our winner. So staying in the NES realm for the moment, Dragon Quest 3. I didn't play this until to completion many years after I had beaten Dragon Quest IV. I played it on the Game Boy Color, but it also had a SNES remake, a mobile port, and there's several ways to play Dragon Quest III. Mm-hmm. And it was the super popular one in Japan that inspired that rule that Dragon Quest games only release on weekends. That wasn't a law. That was just like local police forces asking Square Enix if they can release Dragon Quest 3 on a weekend because they were concerned about people missing school and work.
Okay, this is sort of a side note, but is that because I've read lots of people who have said that's like an urban legend that isn't true. Some people say it is true. Like I'm never sure.
The urban I talked about this with Kim Wallace at E3 a couple of years ago, and she interviewed Dragon Quest 11 staff asking this question, and they clarified it for her.
Okay.
The urban myth is that it's a law in Japan. That is not true.
Okay.
There is no law that says Dragon Quest games can only release on weekends. But after Dragon Quest 3 released, so many people missed work and school that before Dragon Quest 4, I think it was like the Japanese Ministry of Police or something asked Enix directly, "Hey, can you only release these on weekends?" Because it was a big problem when so many people missed work and school. Okay. So it was an informal request. And not a law and not a direct order.
So is it something they still do then? Like they still release Dragon Quest on Saturdays? Okay.
I believe so. I haven't heard any news to that contrary.
Okay.
But anyway, back to Dragon Quest 3. It uses all generic characters. You have a male or female hero that cannot change class, and then you can recruit characters of your choosing through Ruida's Tavern, which I think is called Patty's Party Planning Place in recent translations.
Yes, indeed.
And at the tavern you can recruit characters in a handful of jobs. I think the total number is 8 or 9, and they added the thief job for the SNES version, and which also made its way to the Game Boy Color version. Mm-hmm. But and your character, the hero, cannot change class, which doesn't matter because the hero is powerful as hell. But the others can change class by going back to level 1 in their new class. All of their stats are halved, but they keep the spells that they learned in their original class. So you can, level up as a priest up until, say, 30, and then switch to knight. And you'll be a knight, and you'll start gaining a bunch of HP and attack power. But you'll still have the half of the high MP that you had as a priest, and you'll learn all the spells that you learned as a priest. So it's not exactly starting over and resetting the clock the way class changing works in Dragon Quest 9 or in Final Fantasy 14, but it's there's a lot of funky business you can do with that, and classic moves again are giving healing spells to a fighter or a soldier, changing from a mage or a priest to a sage to just to be an even more powerful magic user, and of course there's the goof off or jester class which has low stats and sometimes doesn't obey orders and is just terrible in general. But it can change to a sage, the most powerful magic class, without the use of a special item. So it's the easiest way to get a free sage is to level up a goof off to 20.
Yeah, I think that's what I did last time I played it, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah.
So that's an overview of how the classes work in Dragon Quest III. But the actual quest part of it, I think, is really, really great.
I agree.
And is incredibly forward-thinking for a NES game. Very early on, you're tasked to look for 6 orbs. They're scattered all over the world, and you basically non-linearly go town to town, learn more things, get new items, and sort of discover where each of the orbs are hidden. And they're not like in 6 big towers on opposite corners of the world. Like one of them is a prisoner has it in jail, and you have to talk him into giving it to you. One of it was buried by pirates, and you have to find the pirates' map and find the coordinates where it's buried.
Oh, yeah.
There is at least 1 or 2 where you have to go to the end of a castle or a tower and fight a boss for it. But that main quest of 6 orbs, which is brought back a little bit in Dragon Quest VIII and a lot in Dragon Quest XI, is really, really cool. I love that as sort of a main thrust to the first half of the story.
Oh, no, I agree. I think that there's a simplicity to it, but also like it drives you forward. You know what you're doing. And it does a way better job, sort of talking about Dragon Quest II with Dragon Quest III, of giving you hints about where it is you're even supposed to go. They definitely...
There are breadcrumbs. It's still it's still a NES RPG, so it's going to be... Parts of it are going to be a little bit obtuse, but in Dragon Quest III, if you go to every town and talk to everyone, which is definitely a goal of the designers of every Dragon Quest game, then you will be able to figure things out mostly. And the gimmicks and tricks that it uses, I think are smart and extremely forward thinking for a NES game, and mostly hold up in 2019. This is a game that feels much more sophisticated than 1989 or 1988, whenever it came out.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, full disclosure, I don't think I ever beat Dragon Quest III until maybe a year and a half ago. For the first time ever. It was like when I tried to play it on the NES, the class system foiled me when I was an 8-year-old. There's no way I could handle it.
I definitely didn't figure out character creation or the class system when I was playing it in the 90s. But and again, I didn't beat it until I got the Game Boy Color version many years later.
Yeah, it was. I gave up on it very early on. But going back to it about a year and a half, and I played the SNES version. I was amazed at how well the class system worked, and how well they sort of perfected here. I think the NES design, whereas Dragon Quest IV feels more like a template for an SNES game. This feels like, okay, we've taken what we've learned from Dragon Quest I, Dragon Quest II. We're going to add some wrinkles into it, and we're going to outdo anything that Final Fantasy is doing right now, which I thought they did very effectively with that.
Yeah, Dragon Quest IV is more character driven, while Dragon Quest III is more concept driven.
Yeah.
But it has smart quest design, and in the second half of the game, this is a spoiler for a game that's 30 years old now. It takes you into the world of Dragon Quest I.
Yeah.
You realize that there's been a shadow monster that's the monster that had been tormenting your world is really just a servant of Zoma, a real demon lord. And you jump into Zoma's world to try to defeat him for the last time. And it's the world of Dragon Quest I. You recreate some of the steps of Dragon Quest I's basic quest.
Yep.
Including gathering the legendary equipment. And you also meet your father there, who had fallen into a crevice in the prequel cutscene to Dragon Quest III. So it's a huge dramatic finale in the last quarter or so of the game, with this really solid 6 orbs quest taking up sort of the bulk of the main story. And then you go to Baramos' castle and defeat him, and then there's the big Zoma reveal. This is a cool NES RPG that feels way ahead of its time, and which is why I rate it quite highly. It's I don't know, if we were condensing this to a top 4, I think this would finish 4th for me. But yeah, I love Dragon Quest III, and it's also not over long. It's probably in that 15 to 20 hour range.
Yeah, that seems about right. When I played it recently, that was
say
about
20 hours. So it's not so disgustingly long that it would scare me away from a replay.
Yeah, and the twist at the end is amazing too. I mean, I think it's the first great twist. Final Fantasy I's being a not so great twist with Garland, but this one felt earned. It felt it made total sense that the idea that you are playing as Erdrick, the legendary hero of Dragon Quest I. It felt very earned.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right. I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, it feels very earned. It feels Like it makes sense. It's just a really, really incredibly cool moment. And I love, and we'll talk about Dragon Quest XI later, the way they tie that all together with Dragon Quest XI too. I just thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, it's Dragon Quest 3 is excellent, but again, it's in our top 5, so of course it's excellent.
Yeah.
But speaking of fives, Dragon Quest 5 is the next chronological game in our top 5, and oh man, you want to talk about a game that's character driven? How about the hero's journey in this game?
Oh man. I mean, there are I replayed this again about a year and a half ago, and there are some moments in there that are as effective from an emotional perspective as like any RPG, in my opinion. That sequence with the statues, it's just a masterclass in storytelling. It's amazing.
Yeah, God, the whole your time as a statue, you do not get into a single fight or an encounter, but it's just a beautiful middle chapter of a movie.
Yeah. It's stunning.
Watching it, it's an incredible set of cutscenes, and the scene where your father Pankraz or Papas dies at the end of part 1. I sort of think of this game as in 4 parts.
Mm-hmm.
Is just like I think I gasped the first time I played this because I had not been spoiled on most of this game. It was a complete shock to me.
Yeah. I mean, the storytelling here, I think, is so much better than it is in any other Dragon Quest game that it's silly because I think it's one of the best RPG stories, period. And the way it inverts our expectations, the way it gives us a little bit of choice here and there, and just how much you care about the protagonists and his family. It's and the monster creation. I love this game. I'm sorry. There's so many amazing things here.
Yeah, this is the first big monster recruiting game to my knowledge. At around 3 or 4 years before Pokemon,
mm-hmm.
and the bulk of your party is monsters that you tame and recruit through most of the game. But by the very end, you have a pretty large selection of non-monsters if you don't like having slimes and dragons in your
mm-hmm.
caravan, which is silly because of course you'd want that.
Yeah.
But the fact that you choose a woman to marry and that affects the hair color of your children, which is very cute. And it's an amusing twist that you're not the hero of legend.
Yeah.
You find the hero's sword and hero's shield pretty early, but you can't wield them because you're not the hero.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
But your wife is in the hero's bloodline, and your son is the hero of legend, so he gets to equip the coolest Zenithian equipment, which is a great compromise.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the big drama in the key scenes of this game, just how much you hate Bishop Lodja by the end of end of the series. I think his name is Gemma or Gemma in the Japanese version, and then just the moments of drama and big turning points. It's an incredible Dragon Quest story, and probably the most dramatic hero's journey in all of Dragon Quest, because you go through a lot.
Oh yeah, I mean it beats you down. I mean, and you have these such long periods of time where like you're a slave for 10 years, and the idea that you're like still like a decent person and dad who like has to work through it, like it does a brilliant job of making us emotionally invested early on. It's so good.
You go through his childhood, teenage years, marriage, fatherhood, and you sort of close the loop on the story of your father who had been searching for your missing mother for decades,
mm-hmm.
Or not decades, for probably 7 years until he dies protecting you. It's an incredible story arc in Dragon Quest V, and even though it doesn't have a class system or even a very detailed skill system, making it a little more on the uninteresting side action-wise, but it does have this great monster recruitment and does have this incredible main story. Dragon Quest V is an all-time classic.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much choice still in the battle system. I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you get a golem, you should use the golem, obviously. I think
you want a slime knight and a golem. They're easy to catch, and they are good the whole game.
Right. The slime knight is useful. I think that your son is one of the most powerful characters in the game, and your daughter can be pretty powerful as well. And then if you make the correct choice, Deborah is also really good in battle with who you marry.
Correct choice. Get that.
Yeah, so I think there's still enough choice in there to make it interesting.
Yes, there are good options and choices for party design, but I still think that I still like skill systems and class systems a lot, and
I agree.
And if Dragon Quest V had a rudimentary skill system, I would like it even more.
Mm-hmm. But
that's enough about Dragon Quest V. Let's move on to 7, which you've brought up a couple times in this podcast already.
Yeah.
Dragon Quest VII, it has some really interesting story design. There's time travel, there's sort of world creation, and there's a massive good versus evil conflict that you're sort of putting to a close. It's really interesting. Basics of the story: God and a demon called I don't even remember his name. What was it?
Gosh, I can't remember either.
Or Gordomir. That's it. Yeah, or Gordomir. Right. God and Gordomir had a huge battle that left both of them exhausted, and then humanity sort of developed while both of these two beings were resting. But slowly, Gordomir's influence had his army of demons sort of destroying the world piece by piece. And in the present day, at the very beginning of Dragon Quest VII, all that exists is a single island. And so you're a boy on this island, and you have your best friends, Maribel and Kieran. And Kieran's the prince of the kingdom on the island. And you find a mysterious shrine that has you, and then I'm skipping a lot of details here, that has you pop back in time. You have a short adventure on a world that none of the three of you had seen before. And when you pop back into the present, you take the puzzle pieces that you found in an adventure, and when you assemble the puzzle pieces, that basically that land appears in the real world, and you quickly realize that by visiting this shrine, you're going back in time and battling the demons over Gordomir and righting the wrongs of conflicts in the past. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, these worlds that were these islands and continents that were destroyed become undestroyed in the present.
Yeah.
And from this, and again, we talked about how Dragon Quest VI, or at least a lot of Dragon Quest games, maybe especially 6, feel segmented. They feel extra segmented in 7.
Absolutely.
But then as you complete these puzzles, you literally reassemble the world like puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
And you see how these separate anecdotes in the past tie into the present, and they open up a lot of different side quests and main quests in the present, and give new context to stuff that you did in the past. It's pretty amazing. It's the longest Dragon Quest game. I mean, the PS1 version takes at least 100 hours to get through. And one thing I've said on podcasts before, Dragon Quest VII is great Dragon Quest, but it's also the most Dragon Quest.
Yep. You couldn't put it any better. Yes, I agree.
It's like Dragon Quest VII is excellent, but it's a slow burn, but I have to say I really love the 6 main characters.
Mm-hmm. They're great. Kiefer's great. Yeah. What's her name? Ash, right?
Yeah, I think so. No. It's Ira.
Ira.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was Ira on the PS1 and Ash in the DS.
Okay.
In the 3DS.
Yeah. She's excellent. I think all the characters are great.
Yeah, like Melvin is a statue that you revive, and he's supposedly the resting place of a great hero. But really, he's an old man who was a great hero, but is maybe a little bit
past his prime.
A little bit creaky. Yeah,
he's so weird.
Yeah, and then you have Gabo/Ruff, who this is cool. Pretty early in the game, so I don't think this is a spoiler. But there's one of your adventures in the past. A demon curses a village, turning all of the humans into animals and all the animals into humans. Mm-hmm. And Ruff was a wolf puppy that got transformed into a human boy. And when you right the wrong of that village and take care of business there, Ruff is still following you around. And when you get the demon to reverse the curse on him, but instead of him turning back into a wolf, he just gains the power of speech.
Yep.
So he's a wolf that was turned into a boy, and is very, very excited about experiencing the world as a human. Whenever he comments on interesting smells and food in a way that's very, very sweet. He's a very good character.
He's so adorable. He's a very good boy.
The main characters of Dragon Quest VII are a really, really solid bunch, and I enjoyed all of them. It has, again, more personality than 6 in my opinion.
For sure.
And the whole concept of reviving the world piece by piece and then rebuilding it piece by piece with literally the metaphor of a puzzle. And I maybe haven't explained it as well as the game executes it, but it's really, really satisfying. The problem is this game just takes so long to get going. On the PS1 version, you're that starting village doing like fetch quests for at least an hour.
I mean, I think it's more like 4 hours because they have these like really long puzzle sequences in there as well. That they cut out of the 3DS version. They
simplified them greatly in the 3DS.
Yeah, they're much easier. I mean, I never beat it on the PS1. I got maybe 50 hours in, and then like I don't know, life happened or whatever. I remember liking it, but the 3DS version for me was like perfects a lot of the problems, simplifies things, makes the class system not quite as breakable, but you still can. So I thought the 3DS version was a much better version. So if you've tried the PS1 and didn't like it, try the 3DS version. Works way better.
I did play the PS1 version for about 10 hours, but I didn't even get to the class system.
Oh yeah, it takes like 30 hours to get there. Yeah,
that's probably around the 20-hour mark on the PS1 and the 12 to 15-hour mark on the 3DS.
Yeah. Oh, it takes forever. And then even once you get there, they fake you out. And then you have to go do another quest. It's actually the hardest dungeon maybe in the whole game in order to actually
It's one of the hardest
classes.
parts of the whole game is right before you get classes. But after you get classes, you're much more powerful. And the game isn't exactly a cakewalk, but it's an unusual difficulty spike right around when you first find classes. And also you mentioned how it's more breakable in the PS1 version. I haven't played far enough to do it, but basically it takes like about 30 to 50% longer to level up classes in the PS1 version, but you permanently keep some stats and all spells and attacks class to class. While in the 3DS version, you permanently learn all of the spells and skills of your level 1 base classes. But in level 2, in the level 2 and level 3 classes, you don't permanently learn those skills, but you relearn some of them in level 3. So it's less breakable, but still very, very powerful.
Yeah, and in the 3DS version, you can like download these tablets that allow you to go in and battle like specific kinds of monsters, and that makes it a lot easier to grind those out too.
Yeah, it's similar to the map system in Dragon Quest IX.
Yeah,
but it's more encounter specific, and it lets you, if you're smart and check some guides, then you can specifically target types of monsters for your leveling needs or your job or your item needs, which is cool. Again, that was sort of slightly unnecessary online side content, but the real meat of that 3DS remake is playing a more streamlined version of the longest Dragon Quest game.
Yeah,
it's Dragon Quest, but I mean, I complain about its pace and its length a little bit already, but Dragon Quest VII is still excellent. I love the rebuilding the world mechanic, the anecdotes from island to island and puzzle to puzzle are really, really strong. That one with Gabo and the village of people that turned into animals is just one of, I don't know, maybe 20. There's so much story in this game.
Oh yeah, I mean, to me, outside of Dragon Quest V, I like the story here better. I think the overarching story is, in terms of like the church is actually bad, is one of the better versions of that. It doesn't happen because it's such a common trope, but I think that the storytelling within each of those little vignettes is much stronger than it is in Dragon Quest VI. And I think that I love that when you restore the island, sometimes it doesn't work out the way you hope it does. Like sometimes you go back.
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't neatly wrap everything in a bow.
Right. I think it's really mature in storytelling, and I love the way that some of the stories, as you go, interweave as more islands like sort of that are next to each other come together, and you can see the way the world building is really excellent. And I think the storytelling and the characters are the most mature outside of Dragon Quest V. I think that Dragon Quest VII has the second best story to me, and I love the class system here.
And also, there's recontextualization. Like in several of those story vignettes, you meet a tribe that worships a specific spirit. But then, like late in the game, you realize that these separate groups of worship actually are sort of connected to a larger whole, and you need to and there's a reason that Orgodamir specifically targeted specific areas when he was taking over the world. And it like you're literally assembling the world piece by piece, and it gives new context and new stories and interweaving stories the more pieces you revive. It's really quite brilliant, and I like Dragon Quest VII a lot. I beat it right when it came out in like 10 days or 2 weeks or something.
That's amazing.
I really, really no-lifed that thing.
I mean, I think the 3DS version is only like 70 hours maybe, but still it's impressive.
Yeah, like 65 to 70.
When I say only,
I beat it right at I think it was like 66 hours or something.
Yeah, that tells you how much they cut out of the PS1 version.
They did cut out even some story segments. I remember going through a part of the game that I did remember from the PS1 version, and the storytelling was different. I think there was fewer cutscenes.
I also love the post-game boss in this game. The fact that it's actually the Almighty, and he's so like goofy and weird, and he's actually really challenging, but it's such a strange fight. And you have to beat him like 7 times to actually do the post-game all the way, which is a little annoying, but he was challenging enough that I found it entertaining.
Well, he's kind of like fighting the Wishing Dragon in the post-game of Dragon Quest III.
Yeah.
Where every time you fight him, you get him to, I think it either grant you one wish or complete one task. They also bring this back a little bit for Dragon Quest XI. But anyway, that's Dragon Quest VII. Let's move over About I guess it was about 5 years and one console generation to Dragon Quest VIII.
Yep.
Now, this was the game that probably was the biggest popularity spike in Dragon Quest history.
Oh, for sure.
It was the first Dragon Quest game to get released in Europe, and was the first one that had a new translation in something like 5 years for its North American release. And it even had a package in with a demo for Final Fantasy XII, which was an extra incentive for people to try it.
It was a smart move on their part, yeah.
Yeah, but on top of all that, it was just a really, really good RPG.
Yeah.
And I think was, again, sparked some new popularity for the series in territories outside Japan, which it already was a cultural touchstone.
Yeah. I think that for a lot of people, like friends of mine who are sort of vaguely into RPGs, but aren't intense the way that maybe you and I are about this series, they played this one for the first time, and it oozes so much charm. The art style is amazing. It still holds up today. I mean, I think that this or 11 are probably the two most popular at this point, and there's a good reason for that.
I think 8 might still be the most popular,
yeah.
but 11 has a lot of recency bias working in its favor.
Yeah.
But Dragon Quest 8, first of all, just looks good. It uses cell shading and a fully 3D space, and it's like a beautiful cartoon in action. While Dragon Quest 7 on the PS1, I mean, did look like a dressed up Super Nintendo game, and visually is not very impressive. But Dragon Quest 8 also was the first time bringing combat somewhat out of the first person. You can see your characters do attacks, and you can see the characters holding the weapons that you're equipping them. So that, like, modern amenities like that were a huge step above Dragon Quest VII. And on top of that, I think it has a very competent skill system and just a really good set of story and characters. Like, this is just a good RPG that is maybe the first fully realized version of these Toriyama designs. Like the slimes and Drakis and moles and everything sort of move and have and like it's cool and beautiful instead of just satisfying from an RPG's perspective.
Right. I think that I always like that sort of cel-shaded art style. It always holds up. Like Tales of Vesperia still holds up because for that same reason from a graphical perspective. I think it's great. But I think that the voice acting for us really probably helped bring it to life a lot. Yangus is such an iconic character because of, I think, his voice acting. So I think that was a smart move on their part to add that in. I think
the voice acting was only in the North American and worldwide versions first.
Yeah, and that was a smart move on their part to make it more popular over here. I think they gussied up the menus a little bit, which was also really smart on their part.
Yeah, they gave the Western versions a full cutaway menu instead of the black boxes with white bars that were also in the Japanese version. They also gave a fully orchestrated soundtrack instead of the MIDI version, which Sugiyama probably didn't like because he's a hateful old man.
Right. But yeah, the characters are really lovable here. I think the characters are better in Dragon Quest VIII than anywhere else. I think that they're all
Yangus
excellent.
And Jessica are two all-timers. I love both of them so much.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that they're both just really fascinating. They're not defined by the tropes that sort of spawned them, and they all the game just has like a beating heart that I feel like you can sort of touch because the characters are so lovable, which I think is what really sells this game.
Agreed. And I mean, the main characters are the hero, Yangus, Jessica, and Angelo. And Angelo I don't love him as much as Jessica or Yangus, but he's still great. And the 3DS version increases the playable party by 50%.
Yeah.
They add Red and Mori, who are likable and fun. They aren't necessary to join your party the way the other four are, but they're I would call them welcome additions.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're the second and third most powerful characters in the game, so they're definitely helpful, especially for some of that.
Very high. Yeah, they're powerful,
especially for that post game. I mean, just using tension with the right way with those two. I love, and it brings me to the battle system. This is my favorite battle system. I love the tension system. I think it's way more strategic than what you get in 11, and I love like the way that you have to sort of pull different pieces together and sort of time things out in a very particular way in order to unleash attacks in the right way. Certainly the skill system isn't as robust as 7, but in terms of the actual battle system in battle, it's my favorite. I think it's excellent.
Agreed. The battle system and is very well realized. The skill system gives you a lot of customization. Each character has sort of 5 categories of skills to throw points into. and even if you level all the way up to 99, you only get 350 points. So you have to make choices. You can't just easily max out everyone
unless you farm skill seeds, which is insane. But I know people who have done it.
That's brutal. Or do that if that's what you want. But it's
right.
It's a large time investment to max out anyone in this game. Where in Dragon Quest 11, it's much easier. The tension system and the skill system are really, really smart RPG design, and it makes your player choice feel very efficacious. But maybe even better, in the 3DS version, they refine the skill system a little bit. They actually show you how many points it takes to get skills, when it was a bit of a blind draw in the PS2 version, which I think was a positive change. And also, enemies appear on screen in the 3DS version, so you don't have to walk back and forth in hopes of fighting a metal slime. You can avoid monsters you don't want to fight and then chase after those metal slimes yourself.
Yeah, there's a spot outside of like the Dragon's Den area in the post game where I just like ran back and forth to get the King Metal Slimes over and over again. So yeah, it was much easier to grind up if you need to in this game.
Yeah, it's it made the grind easier and the skill system easier, which were two. The grind is a bit of a problem in the PS2 version, and the skill system is a highlight. So improving both of those things is very welcome. But I mean, we talked about the characters and the mechanics a lot. This story is really sweet. It's very cute. You're the princess is turned into a horse and the king is turned into a troll, and you're their loyal knight trying to cure them. And then things, escalate, and it becomes a world-saving conflict at the end against a demon lord because of course it is. But I think that it's a really, really good story escalation. I don't think the story is as satisfying as 5, and maybe not the parts of it aren't quite as satisfying as 7.
Yeah, I agree.
But 8 has a really, really great story.
And Dulmagus is maybe the best Dragon Quest villain outside of Bishop Lodja, I guess.
Well, I think that Lodja and Sorrow are a little bit more well-realized villains than Dulmagus. Maybe because they're more present. I mean, Lodja just commits more horrible things to the main character.
Yeah.
And Sorrow has, even though he's the final boss of a NES game, he has a real arc and real motivation that you can find by just going through the story and maybe talking to a few NPCs. That he seems like he has more sort of background to him than Dulmagus does. But Dulmagus as a presence that you're always chasing, and they do the sort of Jaws and Sephiroth thing where you don't see a lot of him until the action is really present. But the fight against Dulmagus is really satisfying.
I agree with you. I mean, I think it's one of the best fights in all of Dragon Quest, and the post-game version of him is really difficult too. You have to be like level 99 to take him down. And I think he's a little Kefka, definitely. A lot Kefka, probably. So I think that sort of knocks him down a notch, but I think that his presence is so strong, and the atrocity that he commits before the game starts is so large that I think that it makes him a really strong villain. But I certainly agree that Lodja is a stronger villain, yes.
Well, yeah, he turns the entire home kingdom of the hero into stone/thorns.
Right.
The way that you're sort of always chasing him until it comes into a head in that temple, and even the first boss fight against him is pretty challenging. Like you got to be you'll get smoked if you don't have a good means of all healing, like like the multi-heal spell.
Yep, that happened to me the first time through. I remember that.
Yeah, me too. I had to level up, and I think I checked a guide or something like, Angelo learns multi-heal at level, I don't remember, it was in the late 20s or maybe right at 30.
Yeah.
And so the first time I had to grind the whole game was to get a healing spell so I could survive a couple of Dulmagus' attacks. Yeah. And again, it's a really satisfying boss fight. He's a really good villain. He ends up not being the ultimate villain of the game.
Right.
The final boss battle isn't that great, but the final castle is really cool. I really liked the castle in Dragon Quest VIII.
And the post game's really strong too. I think it was the first one that added some meaningful story to it as well. You really haven't beaten that game, similar to 11, of course, until you've played that, at least the Dragon Trials.
This one, like you mentioned, has a lot of story, and it gives you context for the hero's ancestry, and introduces a really cool area of the game. I don't want to spoil it here, but the post game in Dragon Quest VIII is really strong.
Okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, I like it a lot.
But moving on, Dragon Quest XI, which came out in 2017 in Japan, then 2018 worldwide, and we're getting a Switch remake very, very soon. I think later this month.
21st, I think. Sounds about right.
Sure, sounds right. I was blown away by this game. Again, it's like Dragon Quest VIII in that it's a fully realized 3D world with beautiful environments and great character animation, which is, the first time this has happened since Dragon Quest VIII. But everything just looks incredible, and they removed some Dragon Quest traditionalism that surprised me. You can save in more places than just an inn, and it's kind of like Dragon Quest IV in that each character is basically one of the classes from 3.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like 8 because every character has individualized skill systems. The end result is just 8 characters that feel very unique both in personality and in battle.
Yeah.
And I love all 8 of them. It's such a good cast.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think... can we talk about the 8th character here? Or we want to hold that?
Okay, well, the 8th character is a secret character. Because the game is so recent, I want to avoid talking about it. But there is one character that joins later than the other 7.
Okay, fair enough.
And that character is very, very good, and recontextualizes the role of certain characters in the first third of the game. Basically, the game is in 3 acts, and I guess you could call Act 3 the whole post game, but it's. Oh boy, it's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's really not even a post game. It's with 30.
It's
really
30
hours.
3, not a post game.
Yeah, it's 30 hours. And that's where all because one thing that I think makes Dragon Quest XI so accessible is that I think it is certainly even more than 8 the easiest of the Dragon Quest games. But you get some real challenges that are really unique in the third part, which I loved. And I love that you couldn't just like brute force your way through some of those challenges in the third act. That you had to do things in a certain amount of turns. And it didn't matter what level you were. You could be level 99, but you had to be really, really cautious about the way you rolled the skills out. I think the skill system here is a little bit stronger than it is in 8. I don't like the battle system quite as much. What's it called again when you enter a superpowered state in Dragon Quest XI? You turn blue. What's it called? I can't remember.
Oh, it's not high tension anymore.
No.
It's they give you they have a special word for it.
Yeah, I don't like that as much because it feels more random. I like the way that 8 sort of forces you to mess around with that system a little bit more. But I think the battle system here is really excellent, and I love the cast of characters. It just feels like the most polished, most perfected version of what Dragon Quest has always been, in the most accessible format that it's ever been in. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all.
The open world feels great. Like you ride around these really vast areas on a horse, and like I even had my favorite campsites and my favorite crafting areas by the end game of this.
Yeah,
and it's the coolest Dragon Quest world to traverse. The story is all right, and the main characters are great. And I think that we talked about this a lot on the spoiler cast episode, but the transitions between sort of Act 1 to Act 2 and then Act 2 to Act 3 are not problematic, but like. Should they have done it this way? Kind of thing. Like they go into some story convention BS that maybe not everyone appreciates. I was not sure how I felt at the time and was ultimately okay with it. But again, without spoiling it, there's some story choices that are made.
Yeah, and I don't think all of them worked perfectly. But they still made sense, and they still gave me things that I liked, like some characters that we got to play as, and then like the post game, which I thought was the most fun part. That sort of leaned into the parts of Dragon Quest that I really like, which is sort of taking the simplistic battle system and having to be very strategic in the ways in which you execute it.
And one crazy thing is, we mentioned this when we were talking about Dragon Quest VII, how when you revisit certain areas in new context, it adds to the story. You visit. Maybe not every town, but almost every town in both Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. And there's a different thing happening or a different thing to do in the town each act.
Yeah. And
in a way that feels really, really powerful.
Yeah, I loved in particular, I won't spoil it, but what's going on in Hado between Act 2 and Act 3. I thought that the distinction, what was happening there was fascinating. I thought was one of the strongest story moments for the game. Yeah. And
what's going on, I forget the name of the kingdom, but the Ice Kingdom has a sort of a normal fairy tale-ish save the kingdom from the Ice Witch story in Act 1. And then in Act 2 you're sort of dealing with another one of the town's local legends, but with the help of the queen and the witch that you saved before. And then in Act 3 there's sort of post-game activities to do there involving the same characters. It's like you see situations like that. It's much more dramatic in Act 2 and Act 3 in Hoto, but it's a situation like that in almost every location in the game. And again, this isn't really a spoiler because it's the first 20 minutes, but in the very beginning of the game, the whole conceit is, oh, you're the hero of legend. You're the hero of legend. You're the chosen one. You need to go to the kingdom. And it's just like Dragon Quest 2 or 3. Oh, the hero has to go and visit the kingdom. But when you get there, the king's like, hey, wait a second. How come the monsters always come at the same time as the chosen hero? Maybe the chosen hero is the leader of the monsters.
Yeah.
And your answer to that is, oh, no, absolutely not. And you get thrown into the dungeon, and then you escape the dungeon, and the story begins in earnest. But just flipping that story conceit on its head and making you a hunted hero, game's words, not mine, for most of the game is a really impressive story turn.
Yeah.
I thought, like, that's exactly the way to subvert Dragon Quest a little bit while still making it really fun and exciting.
Yeah.
You could feel the writers winking at you a little bit, but I was invested from the very beginning.
I agree. I mean, it so strongly honors what Dragon Quest is about, and we've talked about. This isn't really a spoiler, but the credit sequence at the end where it shows all those previous Dragon Quest games.
Oh my god!
Where I'm like crying a little bit. Yeah, I cried.
Yeah,
and it honors so well what Dragon Quest is, but it also inverts the expectations along the way in really fascinating ways. Not perfect, but I thought it worked for the most part. But yeah, it feels like the most Dragon Quest outside of maybe Dragon Quest VII. In some ways, it feels the most Dragon Quest, but also like smoothed out and inverted just a little bit to make it interesting. It's such a well designed game. It might be the most well designed RPG I can think of. I mean, like, it's almost perfect in the way that it plays.
Yeah, and in Act 1, you have to do a new version of the Six Orbs quest from Dragon Quest 3, and I mentioned how there's a huge reference to Dragon Quest 3 in the post-credits sequence, and how each of the 8 main characters is basically exactly one of the jobs from Dragon Quest 3. Like, this is, in a way, it's a prequel or a new version of Dragon Quest 3, but in other ways, it's basically its own standalone story that is extremely referential and respectful to every other game in the series, while standing on its own pretty well. And I mentioned this before; it's the most beautiful realization of a Dragon Quest setting and Dragon Quest monsters. Like, everything in the at least in the PS4 version looks awesome.
Yeah,
and again, like, just riding on your horse. I think that it's important that in any video game, not just RPGs, that moving and jumping just have to feel good. And the moving and the horseback riding in this game just felt great.
Yeah, the fact that they added dashing in for us as opposed to the Japanese version was really helpful too. It makes things move a lot quicker. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard for me because I'm definitely picking up the Switch version at some point, probably early, and I'll play it. It's going to be hard for me to go away from the beautiful graphics that you see in the Dragon Quest XI on the PS4 and go. I want to play it in the 16-bit version, like, really badly.
I want to try that as well. Again, I don't know when I'll get to it, but it will happen. It's a matter of when and not if.
Yeah, and it just looks so good that it's going to be hard for me to, like, sort of take that away. But yeah, it's such a beautiful looking game, and especially for someone who's been playing this for 30 years, to see them realized in full 3D so beautifully. The environments are varied. It's just such an amazing game.
Yeah, we both love Dragon Quest XI, and it was definitely my game of the year last year.
Yeah,
and it was probably the only game in the past, I don't know, say 7 years that I think enters my canon of all-time favorite games immediately.
Yeah, that Nier Automata for me. Yeah.
No, for me it's just Dragon Quest XI. but yeah, it's really excellent and definitely in our top 5. Zach, we at the beginning of this podcast, I said that we had to pick an overall favorite, and we examined each of our preferences, and I did speak to Keegan and Rob and some other RPG fan people, and our conclusion was almost a near consensus.
I believe the consensus was Dragon Quest V, right?
Yep, Dragon Quest V. It's that hero's journey. It's the big drama in the storyline. It's your pet cat. It's your wife and kids. It's recruiting monsters. It's a really, really special game that feels personal and emotional, and also as satisfying as an RPG.
Which is amazing because there are some real contenders here. 11, a real contender. For me, 7, a real contender. But man, 5, that story, it makes me emotional multiple times throughout. I love the family dynamic. I love the monster gathering. I usually don't like capturing monsters. It's such a well put together RPG.
Agreed. And for me, it was really 5, 8, and 11 are sort of the top 3 with. Dragon Quest 3 in there as like the legacy pick. Like, you're extremely important and still great in 2019. But 5 stands out strongest.
Yeah.
And it's kind of remarkable how our top 5 are each in different console generations.
Oh yeah, that's true.
We got NES, PS1, PS2, PS4 slash 3DS slash Switch, but the those 5 are all contenders. But Dragon Quest V is our overall favorite, and I don't feel bad about it.
No, I mean it's an excellent game that I would recommend to anyone who enjoys RPGs. Like Dragon Quest, don't like Dragon Quest, whatever. It's just an excellent game.
And Dragon Quest V absolutely stands the test of time, and it is our favorite Dragon Quest game here at Retro Encounter. But I think that's all for our favorite Dragon Quest episode of Retro Encounter. Thanks so much for joining me, Zach. I mean, it takes very little prompting for me to just BS about Dragon Quest with someone, but I had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. I'm always down to talk Dragon Quest.
Right on. And listeners, thank you for joining us for this full episode. But next week, we do not know what we're doing yet. I am still flying on the seat of my pants here, trying to assemble people for a topic, any topic. Our sports idea that we had starting from several months ago looks like it's tanked. But we will figure something out and have something recorded for you next week. But later this month, we're doing 2 episodes on Wild Arms 3, which won a fan poll earlier this year. Those are going to be the last 2 episodes of September. I'm still early-ish in Wild Arms 3, but I'm really, really enjoying it. This is a cool PS2 RPG, and I'll definitely have more specific thoughts for you in 2 weeks. But listeners, if you want to reach out to us, please email retro@rpgfan.com. That's the best and most direct way to find us. You can also comment on RPG Fans message boards, visit our Facebook page, our Instagram page, our Twitter, our Discord server, our Twitch, what do you call it, Twitch? Channel, yeah. or our Twitch channel. We have something streaming on Twitch every single day from our video team, and they do a lot of fun work over there. We also have 2 other podcasts, Random Encounter and Rhythm Encounter. Random Encounter is hosted by Greg Delmage and focused on current events. Rhythm Encounter is hosted by a variety of people and focuses on music, but it has not had an episode in a few years. And you can review us or Rhythm or Random on iTunes, Google Play, or however you are listening to us. Please give us all the feedback you wish to provide. So, Zach, if a listener wants to reach out to you directly, how would they do so?
You can email me at zachw@rpgfan.com, or you can find me on Discord at zachw.
And listeners, if you want to reach me, you can find me on Twitter at @TheRealMonsoon, also at Evoker for Dogs, on Discord as Monsoon Mike, or on the forums as Monsoon. So, Dragon Quest V.
So good. So good.
It's real good. We did 2 episodes on it a couple years ago.
Yeah. They're good episodes.
If we did another Dragon Quest episode, what do you think would be the best candidate?
I think that Dragon Quest 3, given its tie-in to 11, would be a good choice. I think 4 would also be popular. Those are both, relatively digestible as well. The other ones are very long.
You also can definitely beat those less than a month, and
right.
You can only beat 7 or 11 in a month if you're an insane person like me.
Or me.
But listeners, don't be an insane person like me. Thank you. Good night and good luck.